Hello, Professor. I'm submitting my Genogram assignment. It's Noemi Valderas, by the way. Uh, I began my Genogram assignment with me in the pink, if you can see it. Um, there in the pink, I was able to go up 5 generations and able to go down 1 generation. So, total, I had 7 generations in my genogram, which I feel was very surprising. I wasn't expecting it to go down or up that far. Um, so I went up with mom and dad, and then from there I went up with grandparents, great grandparents, great grandparents. I did not include aunts and uncles because I feel that would have been extremely complicated, considering my my grandmother on my mom's side had 15 kids. My dad, my grandma on my dad's side had 9 kids. So I feel, and then from there it just trickles down. It expands very fast because of traditional Hispanic culture. We just have a lot of kids in when in Mexico. So looking at it, I noticed that we last till the end. We are mostly pass away in our 80s or 90s. If we pass away in another form, it's because of an accident. So I do have a very strong genetic I have very strong genetics. So below me was my son Nicholas and my 2 nieces, Heaven and Natalie. I only have 2 siblings, my brother Francisco and my sister Jennifer. My brother's older than me and my sister is younger than me. So for our first question, which genogram did you choose and why? I decided to choose the more traditional genogram because I felt that beginning with standard genogram would be less overwhelming, especially like I said, coming from a Hispanic background where we're traditionally come from big families, and I also wanted to leave out specific people because I did not want my trauma to surface, and I feel that exposing that might be too fast or too soon. So this is why I chose a traditional or the standard genogram that we see in the United States. My personal experience with the genogram process and what new and interesting connections were made among the relationships explored was anxiety producing at the beginning, just because I felt that I wasn't inept or I wasn't competent enough to do this assignment. So slowly I was waiting, and I put it off because of the anxiety that I felt with it being our first assignment. But when I did begin the assignment, the process felt cathartic because I saw how many people walked before me and how they accomplished an entire life, which meant that I could accomplish an entire life as well, especially with my ancestors or living into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. My and I feel that that comes from our indigenous past, because I know that Native Americans sometimes lived into their hundreds, into the early hundreds. So I understood how that lineage was passed down. It also became stressful as I continued to delve deeper into my lineage and personal history, because my mother became angry and my father became silent. Those were the people I went to when tracing things back. What was groundbreaking for me was learning about my European past, my European history. My grandfather on my mother's, my mother's side, had an aunt who was of Spanish lineage. She was said to be a tall Spaniard woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. My grandfather said that nobody from her husband's side was allowed to speak to her because they were Mexican. So that was interesting, because I always wondered where my Spanish side was incorporated in our family tree. I also thought about how women before me were never allowed to divorce. I know now women are allowed to divorce now that we're in the United States. There has been breaks in marriages, but women before me in Mexico were forced to stay married, though they might have had an abusive husband. I began to think about the oppression my grandmothers faced and their grandmothers before them. I also began to think about how that impacts me now and how it will impact generations after me. I thought about how trauma is passed down genetically and how our brain is our brain is transformed when we experience that trauma. What insights did you gain about the traits or life experiences that you investigated? Okay, so I tried to explore the alcoholism that runs in my family. I know that alcoholism runs throughout my father's side. And I believe that it may come down from our indigenous past, where we were given, Native Americans were given alcohol by white people. And this is how alcoholism runs rampant in the reservations, and how it was passed down intergenerationally. So all of my uncles on my father's side have a substance use disorder with alcohol. My father did as well when I was a kid. And it continues down to my brother. As I try to delve deeper, my mom became angry and my father became silent, because those are things that are not spoken of. So those things do not exist, even though they're very existent, they're very blatant in our lives. We see how alcohol ruins many things, and how the trauma that it causes. But of course, those things are non-existent in according to our culture, or those things are not spoken of in our culture. So it stayed there at my father's generation. I also tried to map out our history of mental health, and it also remains stagnant. I know that mental health issues run on my mother's side. I know that depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, postpartum depression runs on my mother's side. But of course, those are things that we know of, but those are things that were not spoken of. I know it's mostly what is said negatively about a person, but we don't say that it was postpartum depression. It's just things that are said at dinner as we pass by, but it's never something that is that's more deeply explored. So again, it was something to not be spoken of, so it remained at my generation. I know that my sister and I only have the privilege of being diagnosed because we live in the United States. What I learned about this personal experience is that some things will be more sensitive when working with different cultures. I learned that some trauma will be difficult to expose when you work with traditional Hispanic families because we're taught to silence our trauma. I also learned that even a standard genogram can become overwhelming when completed. I tried to keep mine as simple as possible, and it grew very exponentially very quickly, which actually can be a good thing, but it is also very overwhelming. How I see myself using genograms in traditional settings is mostly I see myself using it if I work with children. I see myself keeping the genogram as simple as it can be and maybe going only up to the grandparents. I see myself using colors in the genogram in picture drawings. I feel that it may be useful with children because so that relationships and trauma may begin to be explored, because sometimes when working with children you can't just delve in and talk about what trauma they face, because sometimes they aren't even able to conceptualize it, and they might not be able to verbalize it. I'm sorry. I also see myself using it when having a silent client. I see myself begin to explore surroundings which influence the person. So that means that I will take parts from non-standard genograms, which become more intricate, and I will place other important person in their lives to be able to decipher those relationships and how they're impacting the specific person, my client. So thank you so much for this experience. It was really eye-opening.